Welcome, everybody, to The Grueling Truth. Tonight we've got a special show since we've got about a little over a week to go before the Super Bowl. We're going to go to top 10 performances by a quarterback in a Super Bowl. Remember, we are brought to you by Gridiron Mo. Check out Gridiron Mo at www.gridironmo.com. I'm your host, Mike Goodpaster, and I want to welcome in my co-host, Matt Andrew Scavage. How you doing tonight, Matt?
I am doing well. How about yourself?
All right. So what criteria did you go to pick your top 10 Super Bowl performances by a quarterback?
Well, I went through every Super Bowl, took a look at every quarterback, every performance, found about 20 to 25, maybe 25 good ones, and then I got it boiled down to 20 really good ones. But the only way to boil it down is you had to have a really special day. I thought you had to be darn near flawless. I found about 10 near flawless performances, and then I just kind of rated them on, it can't just be a bunch of yards. It's got to be, kind of a complete performance with touchdowns. Did you set your team up to win? I just tried to grade it based on outcome of the game, statistics, and just the overall flow of the day.
All right. You want to start us off with your number 10?
Sure. My number 10 is Jim Plunkett from Super Bowl 15. He was 13 of 21, 261 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, and won, I believe, 27 to 10. And at the time, he threw the longest touchdown in Super Bowl history, 80 yards. I want to say that was to, Kenny King. I don't think it was.
It was Kenny King out of the backfield, little swing pass on
the
sideline.
Right.
Yeah. He was one of the guys that were real close to my top 10 because I really like Jim Plunkett. I think he's really underrated, won 2 Super Bowls. I didn't go with it just because I thought there was 10 guys that were a little bit better. But not to take a shot at him because, let's face it, Jim Plunkett belongs in the Hall of Fame, I believe, before Joe Namath. Joe Namath got in there one game. Hell, Plunkett did it twice. And a lot of people remember both Super Bowls that the Raiders won, they were the underdogs in the game and had lost in the regular season to the teams that they beat in the Super Bowl. With the Philadelphia Eagles in 1980, I think they won 10-7 in Philadelphia over the Raiders. And then you had one of the greatest regular season games in NFL history that Plunkett won, lost 38-35 to Theismann and the Redskins at RFK in 1983. So
exactly, and I took a look at the 83 Super Bowl as well. He didn't have as good of a performance. Not that it was a bad one, but it certainly wasn't one of the greatest ones. That game was more about Marcus Allen. But I thought Super Bowl 15, he was very largely responsible for the win. And then obviously on the defensive side of the ball, Rod Martin.
Yeah, Rod Martin played on. What, he had 3 picks in that game?
Yeah, it's still a record.
All right, my number 10 was not in a stressful situation, but, it was still an unbelievable performance. That would be Troy Aikman in Super Bowl 27. They ended up winning the game 52-17. The game was played in his alma mater's home stadium at the Rose Bowl. Aikman, of course, played at UCLA after transferring from Oklahoma. He was named the Super Bowl MVP, completed 22 of 30 passes for 273 yards and 4 touchdowns. I put it like this. My top 4 were guys that did it in the clutch at the end of the game also while playing a great game all the way through. But there's some performances like his and 2 or 3 other ones I got in there where the quarterback was so good it's hard to ignore. And I think people really forget how good the Buffalo Bills defense was with guys like Cornelius Bennett, Darryl Talley at linebacker. Defensive line-wise, you had maybe the greatest defensive end of all time in Bruce Smith. It was a very good defense, and he pretty much just shredded them that day.
Yeah, I've got Troy Aikman on my list as well. This was a really good, flawless performance. It's probably the greatest game Troy Aikman ever played, especially because it was in the big game. But so what was your – I didn't get to ask you this before you named off your 10. What was your criteria as you were picking these?
I had a dartboard, and I put all 100 starting quarterbacks from the Super Bowls on it. I closed my eyes, and I threw it. So I always do it. Now, I did it like you. I went through every Super Bowl, 1 through 50 or 49, and just basically graded. I came up with 18 guys I thought deserved to be there. there was a few guys that actually I had in that list of 18 that just barely missed. And some of them lost the game even, but I thought they really played a great game even in a losing effort. But I just can't see putting somebody that lost in a top 10 list like this. So
right.
I left them out, and we kind of went from there. Like I said, Jim Plunkett just missed mine. Roger Staubach. I think people forget Super Bowl 12.
Yep.
I mean, just only one touchdown, though, 183 yards, 17 for 25. I thought his Super Bowl 13 performance was even better than that, but he lost the game. I think it was 17 for 30, 228 yards, 3 touchdowns, threw a pick. That was probably the first great Super Bowl that was played in a 35-31 loss. And the guy that won that, I actually have a lot higher than that, so we'll get to that in a little bit. So mine was, like I said before, my first 4 were guys that basically in the clutch came through and won the game. There was one performance in there that I think people underrate, but I don't have even in the top 10, which was Bradshaw's performance in Super Bowl 14, which I know he had a rough time. But
very close.
Yeah, but that Ram, I mean, I think Super Bowl 14 was a better game than Super Bowl 13. And I think
it
people
was
forget.
Because there's 2 late
there
scores
was like 5 or 6
13.
lead changes, too, in that game.
Yes.
And it's a 19-17 Rams lead going into the fourth quarter. And the Rams, I think, if they weren't double-digit underdogs, they were really close. I mean, they were 9-7 that year. They had Vince Ferragamo, who nobody really knew anything about. And, I mean, I think that's an underrated performance. But really, I think Terry Bradshaw's entire career was underrated. I mean, the guy won 4 Super Bowls, didn't lose any. And, I mean, almost every one of those games, except maybe Super Bowl 9, you could go back to one play where he made a throw that basically decided the game, in all 3 of them. And, I mean, the throw to Stallworth over his shoulder was a perfect throw. I mean, and I think people really underrate that Super Bowl and that game. But do you want me to go ahead and give you my number 9?
I had the same thing. I had the exact same thing. Super Bowl 14 barely missed my top 10, largely because it wasn't a complete game. He really struggled, but what made his performance really good and worth considering is how he responded to a situation when the Steelers were unaccustomed to being down in the fourth quarter, and he just came in and I believe he threw 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, and see, I think a lot of times that's more impressive than being great the whole game.
Yeah, it definitely is worth considering. It was still a very good performance, but to me it had to be pretty complete to make a top 10 all-time. But it was certainly worthy of consideration.
All right. Now, my number 9, you probably don't have on there, but I'm going with Super Bowl 44 and Drew Brees. I mean, if
I had
you
him
remember,
close.
they were a pretty good underdog there. You had the onside kick. I mean, he threw for 288 yards, 2 touchdowns. But, I mean, he was 32 for 39 in a Super Bowl, which there hadn't been too many guys that have better completion percentages. And I would say maybe nobody has had a better completion percentage throwing the ball 39 times in a Super Bowl. And the second half, they make the comeback. I think they were losing going into the fourth quarter. They make the big comeback. Peyton Manning, of course, throws the ball to the other team. Drew Brees wins the Super Bowl. But I think that's an underrated performance, too. It seems like everybody just remembers the onside kick in the game. But my number 9 is Super Bowl 44, Drew Brees with the New Orleans Saints.
Yeah, you know, I was considering, there were probably about a handful of performances I thought were very similar. You had Aaron Rodgers in 2010. You had Flacco in 2012, Drew Brees 2009, a couple of Kurt Warner performances. There were a lot of very similar performances, very efficient. He had a number of yards and maybe a couple of touchdowns. I thought Drew Brees was top 15. I found 10 performances I thought were just a little bit better. But, yeah, 32 of 39 was impressive.
See, my thing is, like, the Kurt Warner, suppose you're bringing up the game he lost.
Oh, well, no, I looked at all 3 of them. I thought he played good in all 3 of his games. But, you know, I didn't put any of his games in the top 10.
He lost 2 of them, so I didn't have them up there. But Joe Flacco, I mean, he was borderline on mine also. I didn't put him there. I really wanted to, just so I could give you crap about the Niners losing to him.
I figured you would.
I left it out.
I was waiting for it.
Well, I don't want to seem like a bully, because there's a lot of people just want to pick on people when stuff like that happens.
That's good.
And, I mean, I don't want to be one of those guys. A lot of people really have no moral compass and like to pick on people when they feel bad about something. Not really naming any names here, but you know who you are.
Exactly.
Go ahead, Matt. You got what's
my
your
number 9 is your number 10. Troy Aikman, Super Bowl 27, the 22 of 30, 273 and 4 touchdowns. Like we were talking about, I think this is Troy Aikman's greatest day as a pro. He did it in the big game. Did not rely on Emmitt Smith. Ended up being one of the biggest blowouts in Super Bowl history. If it weren't for the Leon Lett play at the end, they would have had the biggest margin of victory. But I thought it was a very efficient game. 4 touchdowns. Well, like you said, it's one of those performances where, I don't think it was just completely amazing, but it was such an efficient performance. It was just such a flawless performance against a very good team that you can't ignore it.
Yeah, and the thing is this, I think Troy Aikman's very underrated. We've talked about it before.
Yeah.
I mean, really, he may have played his 2 best games back-to-back there with the 92 championship game before that and the pass to Harper to win that game. And I will bring that up because that was an awesome game, I thought.
It was a good game. I didn't like it, but it was a good game.
But, all right, so who do you have at number 8?
Number 8, I got Terry Bradshaw, Super Bowl 13, 17 of 30, 318 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 1 interception. If you go back and look at the history of the Super Bowl, starting with obviously Super Bowl 1, you just go up and down the line, look at the stat lines, look at how the quarterbacks played the game, not just the stat lines. This was the first truly great Super Bowl performance. 4 touchdowns, over 300 yards against a Cowboy defense that, in the 70s, they were one of the top defenses. And Lynn Swann, John Stallworth, they were up, I believe, 35-17. Didn't Dallas score 2 touchdowns late in the fourth quarter to make the game look a lot closer than it was?
They had to get an onside kick back and I think they might have got one onside kick back before that to get it to that score.
Right. I mean, it's one of those Super Bowls where you look at the score and you look at the teams playing, you think it was one of the greatest Super Bowls ever. It was a good one. But I thought, like we were talking about, the 79 one was better. They just had the 2 late scores to make the score look a lot closer. But I think this is Terry Bradshaw's greatest Super Bowl.
I think he had 3 or 4 lead changes in the first half there, and the Cowboys were up 17-14, and I believe.
Yeah.
And then the Steelers went on to run and put up 21 points. And the Steelers team, I think, has to be one of the top 2 or 3 teams of all time.
Oh, no question. That was their best team, in my opinion, the 78
All right,
team.
so we're to my number 8, which I have your football Jesus, Joe Montana, in Super Bowl 19. and a 38-16 win over the Miami Dolphins, 24-35. He established at the time a Super Bowl record for most yards passing in a game with 331. Also ran for like 50 or 60 yards in the game, and he earned the MVP. And that was the first time that after the game, 49ers head coach said about Montana that he is the greatest quarterback today and maybe the greatest quarterback of all time. But that's because Tom Brady was in preschool. But and the other thing about that game is nobody thought that game was going to be a blowout going into it.
Mm-mm.
I mean, if you look at that game, I didn't think it was going to be a blowout. I don't know if you're old enough so you saw that one, but
no, that was the year before I started watching football.
Okay, so what did you do? Watch soccer?
No, I was 7. I just wasn't into it.
Really? I was always into watching football. Unfortunately, I still am.
Since I was 8.
But, I mean, the big thing about that I remember is both teams were dominant in the playoffs. I mean, I think the Giants actually put up a little bit of a fight, losing a 21-10 game, but couldn't really move the ball. Then they blew out the Bears, I think, was it 23-0 or 20-0?
23-0.
23-0. And you look at the Dolphins. Yeah. They played a really good Seahawk team, beat them 31-10 after being upset the year before by them.
Yep.
And then in the championship game, they put up 45 on Pittsburgh. But the Pittsburgh team wasn't that great. It was a 45-28 game. I mean, when Mark Malone...
They were a hard team to beat that year, though, for some reason.
They were 9-7. They weren't that hard.
I know, but they beat the '84 Niners. They I think they beat the Dolphins in the regular season. Wasn't that one of their 2 losses? They just were scrappy, and they beat a Broncos team that was really good.
I think the Dolphins went to Pittsburgh that year and beat them like 38-17.
Okay.
Because I taped over that game. You know what I mean. All right. So is it my turn to go first?
Are you on number 7 now? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, because I know that you have that game probably higher. You probably got Montana like 1, 2, 3, but...
No, I don't.
And if you don't, it's just because you don't want to look like a bully, but we know you want to do it. My number 7 is my number 7 is Super Bowl 21, Phil Simms beating the Denver Broncos and Mark Cooper. I'm bringing that up because if Mark Cooper listens to this show, Coop, your team made it to the Super Bowl, but they didn't win. Maybe what happens this time this year also. But, I mean, in a 39-20 victory over the Giants, the Broncos set the record for the highest completion. I mean, it was just, he set the highest record completion percentage, completing 88% of his passes, 22 for 25. He was named to the Pro Bowl for his performance. I mean, he's a horrible announcer, though, don't you think?
Oh, my God. I follow a Twitter feed called Phil Simms Quotes. They just quote him what he actually says during games. They're hilarious because he says some of the dumbest things you'll ever see.
Yeah, because it seems to me like when he does the games, he thinks that if there's any dead air time, they might fire him.
Right.
I mean, seriously. He's a horrible, and you know, the only person worse than him is Dan Fouts.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't like Dan Fouts
did like half the Bengals games this year, and he still can't pronounce half the Bengals players' names.
Right.
But I digress. There's that word again. All right, what's your number 7?
My number 7 is also Phil Simms, Super Bowl 20. The 22-25 is really amazing when you think about how hard that is to do even in like practice when you don't have pressure to get 22-25. But he does it in the biggest game. This was probably Phil Simms' greatest game as a pro. He was not a really accurate passer. He was fairly accurate. He threw a lot of interceptions in his day, but this was definitely his best day. It was a near flawless performance. You know, you knew it was his day when I think the ball bounced off of I forgot the receiver, but I think it landed in the arms of Malarkey.
Yeah,
something like that. And you knew it was his day when the balls are bouncing around like that. And you know, that Giants team was really good, especially on defense. You had Lawrence Taylor was the MVP of the league. But, you know, this game was really about Phil Simms. You know, they had the flea flicker. Everything he did worked. It was just one of those days. And that Broncos defense was good. And so, you know, 39 points.
I think the 86 Bronco defense was probably the second best defense in Bronco history behind 1977.
It could be. Yeah, the 77 defense was great.
Yeah, I mean, this year's defense is pretty good too. But we gotta wait one more game to see how good they are. But you want to go ahead and go with your number 6?
Sure. I had Joe, Super Bowl 19, the 24-35, 331 yards, 3 touchdowns passing, 1 rushing. Really was a complete performance against the Dolphins. Like you said, it was one of those games that was projected to be probably a shootout. I probably would have had this higher. The Dolphins didn't really have the greatest defense, but it was just one of those. Well, it was a near perfect performance.
The problem with the Dolphins is they didn't have the greatest defense in the world, and they really had no running game. I mean, I think their rushing touchdown in that game was by Pete Johnson, who had been traded from the Bengals to the Chargers, and then from the Chargers to the Dolphins.
He caught one.
He caught one?
Oh, no, you're right. No, I'm thinking of
I think he ran it out on 4th and 1, too, just to aggravate me.
Yeah, that could be. That would
I believe it was 4th and 1.
On the 49ers.
Yeah, and I think this. I think that Dolphins team was vastly overrated because I think Don Shula is overrated. And I think Bill Walsh was his daddy that day, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, so I look at that. That to me, that was up to that point. That was the greatest Super Bowl performance in history. I think it surpassed the Bradshaw one. And
I disagree.
It was just it was the
but only by one.
Only by one?
Only by one. No, only by one.
Okay.
I only got one above
up
that.
to 1984.
Yeah,
okay.
I've only got one above that. Hell, I only considered three.
Right, but yeah, it was.
Let's face it, I'm looking
day.
at those just like you did. And I think it was Super Bowl 7 or 8. I think it was 8 where Bob Greasy was 6 for 7.
Oh, okay.
It's like Pee Wee football today. Your quarterback would throw it 7
Yeah,
times.
that was efficient, but I wouldn't put that above Joe's. But go ahead.
Okay, my number 6 is Super Bowl 24. Joe Montana. He seems to be a regular on this show, on Super Bowl. I think that was his third MVP?
Yeah.
Yeah, threw for 297 yards, a then record 5 touchdowns. They beat the Broncos 55-10. I know we've had this argument, but I still think the Broncos were undersized on the defensive line. And if you watch the first half, I mean, I think the game was like at 7-3 at one point, and I think the problem was with that Niner defense is one of the underrated great defenses in NFL history, I think.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think they were I just think they were too physical for the Broncos. And I think the problem was the AFC was weak back then. I mean, there weren't
was
too
the
many
whole
teams.
decade.
Yeah, I mean, there weren't too many teams that weren't soft, basically. I mean, the only ones that weren't would have been the L.A. Raiders in 83, Oakland Raiders in 80, and the Bengals in 88. And those are the only 3 teams that really put up fights. Well, the Browns didn't make it to the Super Bowl, but I don't think
you're talking
the Browns,
about the Super Bowl team. My bad.
Yeah, I mean, the Browns weren't a soft team, but the Browns were a team that, let's face it, the Browns were probably more complete teams than those Broncos teams. But John Elway basically put those teams on his back, willed them to win. Plus, you had the Browns, kind of shot themselves in the foot too. You had to fumble in the 1987 AFC Championship game, where if they don't fumble it, maybe they get to a Super Bowl, and I think they'd have put up a lot better fight. The Browns team in 89, I don't think with Bud Carson coaching them was near what the teams with Marty Schottenheimer were. So
that's very true.
And I think with the Broncos, they had a 1,000-yard rusher that year, Bobby Humphrey, but the problem was they had no rushing game, really. I mean, he was barely over 1,000, I think, which for a 16-game season is not that huge of a deal, I don't think. Was it 60, 70 yards a game?
Yeah.
So my point is this. The Denver Bronco defense was great, but it had a huge weakness, which was the size up front and the fact that with no running game, you're facing a lot of 3-and-outs, and you're on the field a lot. And when you're an undersized defensive front, the other team is just going to steamroll you after about 10 or 15 minutes of gameplay because your ass is gassed.
Yeah, I would agree. There's a lot to be said for that. Obviously you can only play who's on your schedule, but yeah, I mean, there's definitely, they
well, that's
did
not
have
a shot on the Niners because, I mean, hell, the Niners
I know.
probably, the Rams, who the Niners obliterated 38-3 or 33-3, whatever it was in an NFC Championship, were probably a better team than the Broncos.
Maybe, yeah, they just sure didn't show up for the championship game.
No, they looked intimidated, actually. Actually, Jim Everett looked intimidated.
Yeah, that's the game where he fell down before the pass rush ever got there.
Yeah, now see, I would do that, but I'm almost 50 years old and I'm brittle as hell, so I could probably die if I took that hit. But he should be all right with it, you would think. But what's your number 5?
My number 5 is Tom Brady, Super Bowl 49. 37 of 50, 328 yards, did throw the 4 touchdowns and the 2 picks against the Seattle defense. We had talked about that before. This was one of the best defenses. I probably would have put this higher, but he did have a good performance against one of the best defenses, but he also had a lot of problems against them, and very easily could have went the other way, and no one's ever even mentioning him in this game.
Well,
But,
in Super Bowl 23, Lewis Phillips could have picked off the pass, and nobody would mention Joe Montana's game.
Well, yeah, I know there's something to be said for that, but he would have been 3-3 in the Super Bowl, and there would be no greatest ever talk. And,
yeah, there would.
I respect Tom Brady a lot. I think it is him and Joe and everybody else. I think this is probably his best Super Bowl performance. He was probably a little bit more efficient in Super Bowl 38, but at the level of the competition, I think I'd rather see. I think this game, and then he did throw the touchdown near the end of the game, to put him up ahead 28-24, and thank God for Butler kicking that pass off in the end zone. But no, it was one of the best performances. I know we've talked about it, and I'm sure we'll be having this conversation more on the rest of the show. But it made my top 5.
My number 5 is Super Bowl 29, Steve Young. It's the highest of my blowout performances. It was a great performance. And, people forget how good a year he had that year, too. I think he completed almost 71% of his passes for the season. He was a hell of a quarterback. Yep. The thing that keeps him out of discussion, I think, is the 2 or 3 years he spent in USFL, and then he gets stuck on teams worse than what he played in USFL, probably with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Then he has to back up
a lot of his time.
So the thing is, with his numbers, there's a case to be made that he could have had. Really, his numbers are missing 6 or 7 years, probably.
Right, and he still had 6 passing titles, which is an NFL record.
Yeah, and actually that year, I think he broke Montana's single-season mark with a then record 112.8 passer rating.
That's correct.
But on the strength of his 6 touchdown performance that surpassed the previous Super Bowl record of 5, owned by, of course, Joe Montana, Steve Young was named the MVP of Super Bowl 29, as the 49ers basically obliterated the Chargers 49-26. That might have been as boring as the Denver beatdown. I'm not sure. Both games were terrible. Young threw for 325 yards, rushed for 49 yards. If he rushed for 49 touchdowns, he'd be number 1.
That would have been something.
Yeah, he'd have been number 1. There's no doubt.
Yes, with that performance.
And the thing is, he made him the first player ever in Super Bowl history to finish a game as a leader in both rushing and passing yards. Did you know that?
That's correct. He was the leading rusher of the team.
Oh, look, you said that's correct, like you knew. All right, go ahead and
I did. I have it written right here. 49 yards. He beat Ricky Watters by 2 yards.
Yeah, whatever.
You don't think I knew that? Really?
All you can do is claim that you did. It doesn't mean that you did.
I did. You can look it up right now. He's got Ricky Watters beat by 2 yards. I know that.
So you're looking it up. I just went off the top of it.
No, I'm not. I have an index card in front of me with just Steve's stats on it.
I got a computer. All right. Is it my turn to go first?
Well, I did my 5. You just did your 5. Yeah, go ahead.
All right, because I think you did 2 in a row, but I'm used to that. You just kind of take over sometimes.
Yeah, right.
My number 4 is Kurt Warner, Super Bowl 34.
34. Okay,
36,
so it'd be the
36.
Titans game. Oh, 36 against the
36.
Patriots?
No, 34. You're confusing me now. That's what you do when you start bringing all these 49ers into the show. Of course I did too, but that's all right.
So this is 34 against the Titans.
34
right?
against the Titans. And the reason I say that is this. Up until that point, I remember watching that game with my son. He don't remember it because my wife was like 3 months pregnant, so he really couldn't see the game, but I'm sure he heard it. But I remember being all excited. And my wife's like, why are you saying that? I said, because there's 2 minutes left in the Super Bowl. And, how many times does the last drive of the Super Bowl come down to try to win the game? And he gets the ball. Before you know it, though, he's throwing like a 50-yard pass for a touchdown, leading them down to basically win the game. You had the great defensive stand at the end, I know. But I also kind of put him up here just because all of his Super Bowl performances were good. And I think people forget how good he was. In this game, he was 24 for 45, 414 yards, 2 touchdowns, threw the game-winning touchdown pass in the last 2 minutes. And, I mean, he could bag groceries. So you got to give it to him. He's a man. I mean, do you think Cam Newton or Tom Brady would bag groceries?
Probably not.
Probably not. There you go. So he deserves it. What's your number 4?
Yeah, I almost had Kurt Warner. I looked at all 3 of his performances. I thought all 3. I think he's got the top passing yards. I think he's like 1, 2, and 3 all time.
Probably does.
Like,
he's
really
like
close.
400 in all 3 games, didn't he?
Yeah, it's ridiculous. That was the one Super Bowl that was I was leaning towards both that one and 43, but that one he actually really struggled. He completed a lot of passes for most of the game though. They really struggled to get points on the board.
Did. Yeah, both teams did. Both teams moved the ball between the 30s, and that was about it.
Yeah, it just wasn't that kind of a performance to me that was exceptionally special. But he did have the really awesome throw to Isaac Bruce. I mean, and plus it was such a great catch, just a great play. But so it was really close to my top 10. But I absolutely understand putting this in the top 10. My number 4 is Joe in Super Bowl 23 against the Bengals. 23 of 36, 357 yards, 2 touchdowns, both of them in the fourth quarter, including the famous game winner up the 92-yard drive. He was exceptionally efficient the whole game, but then he had 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. Obviously, Lewis Phillips. I would have put this even higher, but I penalized him for the Lewis Phillips throw because that could have changed the game completely. If he comes down with that, instead, he drops it, and then the next play, Joe hits Jerry for his first touchdown in the fourth quarter. But still, one of the best performances. Could have easily got MVP, but Rice had the best receiving day of any receiver up to that point. So I think all his records from that day still stand, except the receptions mark. I think that finally got broken. But one of his 3 best days. I think we both have Joe in here probably 3 times. But yeah, I got this one at number 4.
All righty, what's your number 3?
My number 3 is Doug Williams, Super Bowl 22, 18 of 29, 340 yards, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception. Now, the amazing thing about this performance is a lot of that is just in one quarter. They go down 10-0 in the game to, I think Elway hits Ricky Nattiel for 56 yards on the first play. So they go up. They're up 10-0, and then in the second quarter, I don't think we've ever seen
the ball. It's not even reviewed, and then the red.
That's true. That is true. No question about it. It's not Doug Williams' fault that
nobody ever brings that up either.
You're right, though. You're absolutely right about
that. Everybody was afraid that he might be hurt, and everybody forgot about everything else.
Yeah, you're right. That should have been a fumble, but it wasn't. And he come out and have a 35-point second quarter, and they just dismantled Denver. The game was over. It was one of the best days we'll ever see.
It was the worst Super Bowl ever, too.
It probably was.
Because it's like nobody even played in the second half.
No. Yeah, that's exactly right. Most of the action happened in the second quarter. But, still, being able to put up 35 points in one quarter, I've never seen that. And at least in the big game, other than this game.
I was going to say, did the Niners do that like 5 or 6 times this year?
Gave up 35 points in the second quarter?
In a quarter, yeah.
Maybe.
It seemed like it a couple times.
It seemed like it, but this was it has to be considered one of the very best performances by a quarterback.
Well, it doesn't because I don't have it in my top 10. Wonder if I just skipped Super Bowl 22 when I was looking up all the Super Bowls.
That could be.
I may have just because
340 yards and 4 touchdowns is pretty impressive, especially when most of it's in one quarter.
Well, I'll tell you this. The most impressive thing to me to Doug Williams was the fact that he took the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to the NFC Championship game in 1970.
Yeah, that's true.
Still a miracle order. Because
that was
5-11 season, and then everybody knows what happened the first 2 years.
Right.
My number 3 is Terry Bradshaw in Super Bowl 13. I know you're going to tell me I'm nuts, but
no, you're not nuts.
Like I said, I mean, he threw that. The Doomsday defense was a great defense, great secondary. I mean, it was a close game most of the way, but once again, he made passes, a 75-yard touchdown pass in the second quarter. Great play. The Cowboys stayed close at the end of 3 quarters, 21-17. And then, they scored the Steelers scored 2 touchdowns in a span of 19 seconds. Dallas couldn't overcome it. You had a couple controversial penalties there. Jackie Smith drops the ball. I think it was probably the first great Super Bowl ever, even though it was 35-17 and looked over for a while. I mean, the Steelers-Cowboys was like Ali Frazier back in the day. I mean,
no doubt.
That was a big rivalry. If I remember, they are, let's see. Yeah, I think that was the game. I'm not sure here because I'm not on Wikipedia.
Which one? What are you thinking of?
It's the game that was known, if I remember, because I remember Jimmy the Greek telling a story like the year after, and Jimmy the Greek, everything he ever said was like spot on. I don't remember him ever picking a game wrong, but that was sarcastic because he picked the Bengals to beat the 49ers. Cincinnati, as they call them, to beat the 49ers before Super Bowl 16. But they called that game Black Sunday in Las Vegas.
Go ahead.
Yeah, they called that game Black Sunday in Las Vegas. The point spread opened at 3.5 for Pittsburgh. As the Steelers backers placed bets on them, the sports books adjusted the line, and it eventually hit Pittsburgh by 4.5. And then the Dallas money poured in on the Cowboys and eventually settled at Pittsburgh -4. So the game's final outcome of 35-31 Pittsburgh meant that Las Vegas sports books lost the vast majority of all wagers on the game. That's why it was called Black Sunday in Las Vegas.
Wow. Didn't know that.
And as Paul Harvey would say, now you know the rest of the story.
The rest of the story.
So you know who Paul Harvey is at least, right?
I absolutely do. Used to listen to him almost every day.
Yeah, I know you're young, so I didn't want to screw it up. My number 2, I'll let you do number 1. So my number 2, Super Bowl 23, Joe Montana. Maybe the worst day of my life watching sports. I still have nightmares about it. Lewis Billups dropping the ball, Stanley Wilson snorting crack, Tim Crumright breaking his leg, Boomer Esiason going 11 for 25 for like minus 500 yards, it seemed. They had Ickey Woods and James Brooks, but for some reason didn't want to run the ball after the first half. Yeah, I don't like that game. But the drive to me, there's 2 drives that always stand out to me. It's Montana there, and it's the 86 AFC Championship game with Elway.
Yep.
I mean, you're looking at guys that had to go over 90 yards against very good defenses. And really, also, the thing about those 2 drives by those 2 men, I know we're not talking about conference championship quarterback performances, but if you look at those games, up until those drives and the last 5 minutes for Elway and the last, was it 3:32 or 3:39 for Montana?
Yeah, 3:39.
They had been...
For a guy who only watched that game one time, you remember that very vividly.
Trust me, I watched the game one time when it happened, haven't seen it since, and I remember everything. So I don't
That's
need to watch
amazing.
it. But this is my thing. Neither one of those guys had put a whole bunch of points on the board up till then. So it's not like it was one of these 48-45 shootouts where, you know, Montana gets the ball and you figure, he's definitely going to score. Because you're sitting there and you're thinking, man, this game is 16-13.
Right.
And the Elway game was what? What was the score there?
20-13 or?
20-17 was overtime, so it was 17-10 at the time. So the thing is, these guys had not had a lot of success those days. They both had a lot of passing yards, but they were between the 30s. And, I mean, I think that was actually one of the best defensive games that 2 teams have played against each other was that Super Bowl. Because if you look at those 2 offenses, they were very high-powered offenses that not many people held to 20 points or under.
Right.
And, I mean, it was a very hard-hitting game. And, I mean, there was great defensive players on both teams. And the fact that Montana, I mean, and he did it easy. If you remember, was it Randy Cross had a penalty?
Yep, the holding penalty going back to midfield.
Yeah, it was. I thought it was earlier in the drive, but I haven't watched it 20,000 times like you have. But you had the penalty there. I mean, you had a missed tackle here or there. They almost broke and scored a touchdown with what? Was that like a minute or so left?
Yep.
I think Rice that broke into the open, and the Bengals had one guy to tackle him. I can't remember who it was. I don't remember.
Basically ran through three guys.
Yeah,
two guys on
him.
They fell down, and then one guy slipped past, and then he's in the clear, and if John Taylor doesn't miss his block, I don't remember who the defensive back is that tackled him.
Now I wish that John Taylor would not have missed his block.
Right, because then you had a little bit more time to.
Yeah, then you have over a minute and a couple timeouts left.
Right.
Could change everything, but probably not, because Boomer was terrible that day, and from everybody we've talked to that was with the Bengals there, nobody believes he was healthy, and he hadn't been for a while that year. That's why.
You're saying he hurt his arm late in the year, right?
Yeah, he hurt his arm, and I mean, if you look, the playoff game against Seattle and Buffalo, the thing he was known for, the last long touchdown pass I remember him throwing that year was Week 16. They're down 17-10 to the Redskins at home, and he threw a deep one off play action to Eddie Brown. That was the last long touchdown pass he threw that season. If you go back and look, his touchdown passes, I think all three touchdowns in the playoff win over Seattle, if I remember right, was 2 touchdown runs by Stanley Wilson, a touchdown run by Ickey Woods, and then in the championship game, his touchdown pass was a short little 10-yard dunk to James Brooks, if I remember correctly. So, I mean, there was no long passes, and that was not the way they normally played the game.
Right.
But I digress. I don't want to talk about that game no more. All right, what's your number 2?
My number 2 is Steve Young, Super Bowl 29. My number 2 and my number 1 are, to me, the most flawless performances I've ever seen in a Super Bowl, just because it was just perfect. Young was 24, 36, 325, and 6 touchdowns. The Chargers were not a bad defense, but that day they looked like they didn't even belong in the league. And it was just, the 3 plays into the game, he hits right.
Well, the AFC there was kind of like the AFC from like 84 through the late 90s was crap.
Yep.
I mean, that San Diego team got manhandled by San Francisco in the regular season that year too, didn't they?
Yes, they did. But they, the thing is, if you watch a lot of their other games, they played really good against a lot of teams. In the AFC Championship game, I thought Pittsburgh was going to blow them out.
Yeah.
And and on the road, that was a good performance. It wasn't a bad team that they got to the Super Bowl. I think they were just overmatched.
I think it was a mismatch because of personnel. I just think that sometimes, no matter how good your team is, all teams have weaknesses. The weakness on that Charger team is they did not have a great pass rush.
Exactly.
And if you don't have a great pass rush against the 49ers, you have no chance.
Yeah, there's just too many guys in the field that can beat you. There's just too many. You had Waters out of the backfield, who had a really good year that year. Your Brent Jones had one of his best years of his career over the middle. Rice and Taylor on the outside. There's just too many. There's just too many weapons, and then obviously
the only way to beat that is to get in the quarterback's grill. Like Super Bowl 42.
Exactly.
I mean, nobody really believes the Giants were better than the Patriots, but they
got in the grill.
Their strength was the other team's weakness. And the 49ers had some great offensive lines. And if you look at it, the 2 Super Bowls that were close, the Bengals got pressure on Montana.
Yep.
The 2 Super Bowls where they didn't get pressure, Montana destroyed them.
Yeah, those were either a down year or, the 81 team was just not their best team. But, you're right. Those are the 2 years in the Super Bowl that the other team was able to get some pressure on Montana.
Yeah, and that's the key to beating anybody. That's why the Giants got them a couple times in the mid-'80s.
Yep, no doubt.
So what's your number 1? What 49er do you have there?
Well,
Bill Musgraves, 3 for 4 as a backup in Super Bowl 24?
Well, I am taking Super Bowl 24, which happened 16 years ago today.
No, it
this
didn't.
was the.
No, it didn't.
Yeah,
Your counting
July
sucks.
January 28th, 1990.
Yeah. And that was 15 years ago, huh?
That was 16
You're
years
a
ago.
decade off here, buddy. We're older than what you're thinking right now.
26 years ago, my bad.
Yeah, you're bad. You missed it by a decade. Gee.
Yeah, oops. I
Is that
had
the
the six
Wisconsin
right.
school system? Or?
yeah, I'll blame it on that.
Y'all didn't even have Common Core back then, so that's just messed up.
I'm just enamored by the number 16, I guess. Who knows?
No, I think it's the fact that you don't realize how old you are, because I do the same thing.
1990 does not feel like 26 years ago.
I know, and I'm thinking the other day, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, man, it was last Friday night. I'm thinking, I ain't got nothing to do. I'm going to watch Super Bowl 23. And then I thought about it for a while, and then I found on YouTube the 1988 Missing Rings thing. And by then, after watching that, I was so emotionally drawn that I couldn't watch it. and then I'm sitting there thinking, no, I was. I almost cried when I watched it. That's how pathetic this is. But Super Bowl, then I started thinking, I'm like, this was 27 years ago.
I know.
And I can remember
Crazy.
that day and, like, everything I did that day.
Right.
It's messed up. But that's why I don't have to watch the game again. I know what happened. I do watch the player introductions. I watched the player introductions, though, because those were pretty cool. We were really
That was actually really cool that day.
Yeah, the Niners were kind of gay because they just ran out like they were going to just own the thing by 50. But it was cool to watch, Joe Kelly and Tim Krumrie and all them come out all jacked up. We should have won that game. That was old crap. But, okay, let's go back to your number one.
So,
or were you
anyways, my number one, to me, it was as flawless of a passing performance as Phil Simms. Phil Simms was 22 of 25. Montana was 22 of 29. I mean, that's pretty close. 297 yards, 5 touchdowns. I know that, I'm not claiming the 89 Broncos were the greatest defense of all time, but I do think this was a very good defense. If you look them up, statistically, they held teams to 14 points a game. The only team that got the highest output that they gave up the whole year was 28 points to Philadelphia on the road. Otherwise, nobody got higher than 24
I would like to point out
year.
that's the one really good NFC team they played.
Okay. But they beat the Bills 28-14.
But
everyone
the Bills in '89 were not a very good team, Matt.
They were still pretty good. They were not a bad team.
They were a 500 team. They were 8-7-1.
They still had a lot of good personnel. They had a good offense.
Sure.
Granted, it wasn't exactly the 1990 offense, but it's still a good team. The Broncos were not a bad team, and they just got destroyed. The thing that really stands out to me is if you're going to make a top 10 list, these are the best performances of the best. This was a flawless performance. The game was over by halftime. This was not a bad defense that they played at all. This was a very good defense, and it just made them look like a high school defense. So,
my thing is,
it's the most flawless performance I've ever seen in a Super Bowl.
This is the thing to me, though. Flawless to me is not always the best. The thing that makes somebody great is the ability to overcome a tough situation and to maybe not play that great and to be able to turn it around and win it. So, to me, that was easy for him. To me, I don't think Super Bowl 24 comes close to what he did in Super Bowl 23. That's a close game the whole way. Didn't throw a pick.
Yeah.
I know he got away with it because Billups dropped it, but still, didn't throw a pick in that game either. Threw for, 357 in that game.
Yep.
Drives them 92 yards to win. I don't see how you can take a 55-10 game and say he played better. He was flawless because the competition was not up to the standard of his team.
I think the 89 Broncos defense was
nowhere near
the 88 Bengals defense.
No way.
Or at least as good.
Not that one. So were the Bengals. The Bengals, you had the best nose tackle in football. You had one of the great underrated linebackers in Reggie.
But he wasn't in the game.
Tim Krumrie wasn't in the game? And David Grant came in and played damn near as well as Tim Krumrie would have. David Grant played out of his mind in that game. And I'm sorry, that Cincinnati Bengals defense was worlds tougher than what the Denver Broncos were. And they had a better defensive coordinator with Dick LeBeau. And, I mean, I know that the Broncos had a good one. Was that still the old whitehead Joe Collier? Was that the defensive coordinator for them then?
I don't remember who the coordinator was.
I think it was Joe Collier, who was one of the great defensive coordinators ever, but so was LeBeau. I'm sorry, the Bengals' offense was far superior, which you have to take into effect.
Well, I agree they're a better overall team.
That's what makes the game tougher. You know, when it's easy, anybody can do it.
And it's not easy.
It was
He just
easy.
made it look easy.
I watched that game. It was easy because nobody touched him the whole game.
Yeah, they just went in and crushed them.
Yeah, the other game, he put up damn near the same numbers because, I mean, he's only, a couple touchdowns, 100 yards, but, I mean, he put up numbers that were similar in a situation where he was getting banged around.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's, 3 less
me,
touchdowns,
I know what you're saying about flawless. You go flawless, yeah. I mean, if I was going to go that way, my 3 top performances, in no particular order, are Sims, Young, and Montana. It would probably be in order. It would probably be actually Young, Montana, and Sims. Because flawless, I mean, Young threw 6 touchdown passes and, 1 billion yards in that game. But the thing is this. To me, it's just like, I mean, to compare it like a boxer. You know, I mean, Mike Tyson, when you try to put him in the top 10, everybody says, who'd he beat? He didn't beat anybody that was great. You know, when he was dominant, when he was 25, 26-0 before Buster Douglas upset him, everybody thought he was the greatest thing that ever lived because he was blowing through competition that he was significantly better than. But when you look at Muhammad Ali...
this was still one of the best defenses of the 80s for the Broncos.
Okay. You know, defend yourself of that, but my guess is this. He played better. He played against a better defense when he played the Minnesota Vikings in the divisional playoff round.
Which year?
1989.
89? Oh, maybe it's similar.
That Viking defense was good. Studwell, Dolan, all of them guys, they could play. My number
no matter
one,
who they played that year.
My number one is this. Yeah, because there was nobody worth a crap that year except for them because they were one of the greatest teams ever.
No, see, okay, but it's cheapening them a little bit by saying it that way.
No, it's not cheapening them. It is actually elevating what they did the year before, which actually doing that led to them being one of the greatest teams ever. So my point is this. Montana's Super Bowl 23 had a lot to do with what happened in Super Bowl 24 in that entire season. Because that was a team...
I agree with that.
Yeah, and that was a team that, you know, replaced their coach from 23 to 24, but it didn't matter who coached it, and I'm not taking a shot at Seifert. I think George Seifert was a very underrated coach. But, I mean, he was given the reins to the team that just won the world championship. They drafted well that year. They add some more players. They get even better and stronger. So to me, what he did in Super Bowl 23 may not have been as flawless, but I didn't see too many flaws in it, if any at all. And he was flawless on maybe the greatest drive any quarterback's ever led his team on.
Yeah. Well, that's why it's up there, I totally get what you're saying because you know that factors into me a lot too. You know, what did you do when your back was up against the wall? You know, it was a combination of a few things, and I just felt like for my top performance, I went the flawless direction. But I totally see what you're saying on the pressure. There's no doubt. I mean, to me, they're both valid. I guess it's just preference and where you want to rank
and I
them.
mean, my number one, we might as well get it out there because that is basically this argument. My number one is Tom Brady's Super Bowl 49. I mean, he threw 2 picks first 3 quarters. That Seahawk defense, I'll still say those 2 years, and even this year was still a great defense.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they finished top 2 or 3 in the league in points given up every year. And he's down 24-14. I think most people figured the game's probably over. And he mounts 2 long game-winning touchdown drives. I mean, you could sit there and say, well, if they'd ran Marshawn Lynch, but, I mean, you could say that about most of these games that won Super Bowl 23, one thing could have happened to change it. Super Bowl 34, one thing could have happened to change that. You know, if the dude's not a yard short and gets in the end zone, they're going to overtime. It could change history. So I don't think you can blame him there. But I think the ability to go against one of the great defenses ever and to go down the field twice, if I remember, both of those drives were over 60 or 70 yards, weren't they?
Yeah, especially the first one. I don't remember if the second one was as long, but it was still a good drive.
And see, the first one, you're in the fourth quarter. So you're down 2 scores against a great defense. It's not like you can take your time and figure things out. You know, most everything he did was on the fly, trying to get him back in the game. That's what and to me, same thing with 23. That's why him and Montana, to me, are the 2 greatest quarterbacks of all time, because I see them do stuff like that. And, I mean, if you look at their careers, regular season, playoffs, they've done that stuff a lot.
Yeah.
You know, and, I mean, it's just, and Brady has never played on a team, no matter what mythical Dave Sadurski says, that's anywhere close to the team Joe Montana played on.
Absolutely.
And that's not a shot, and that doesn't lessen Montana to me. I think they're like 1 and 1A. You already know that.
Yeah. That's how I feel. I feel like they're almost the same player.
Yeah. I mean, they're very similar. Everybody says they're system quarterbacks, and they've had great players around them, and they've had great coaches.
Every great quarterback has great players around them.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's how they get to be great.
You can't penalize them.
Yeah. And the thing is this. When it comes down to it, you got guys like Peyton Manning and Brett Favre have losing records in Super Bowl, only won 1. Anybody that wants to compare them to Brady and Montana are idiots. And if you're out there and you think Brett Favre is as good as either one of those guys, or to Peyton Manning is, you're crazy. You know, Peyton Manning didn't beat Tom Brady this last week. Peyton Manning, just basically didn't turn the ball over and let his defense win. And still, Brady, the throw he made to Gronkowski to get inside the 10 on that last drive is as good as any throw you'll ever see.
Exactly.
And that was after the man had been knocked down 30 times in that game.
Right.
I mean, I don't think
and that's the thing. He doesn't get knocked down a lot because of the rules now, but that particular game, he got hit.
He got the hell beat out of him. And the thing is this, I disagree with you. I think guys get knocked down more today than they did back then.
Yeah, but
I don't care about
the rules really protect.
Yeah, but the thing is this.
He's got a rule named after him.
Hey, this is the thing. There's more quarterbacks that get injured during the season nowadays than there were back then, and that's because offensive line play is terrible. No matter what the rules are, you're still taking hits.
Yeah.
And you're still taking blindside hits. They didn't eliminate it where you couldn't blindside a quarterback. It's just you can't take 3 steps and kill him. Now you're only allowed 1. But
you could take a lot more wicked hits in the 80s, man.
I disagree because this is the thing. Matt, defensive ends in the 80s, a lot of times 250 pounds.
Yeah, but if they're not letting up, a hit from Lawrence Taylor when he was full speed.
Matt. There's a lot of penalties for hitting somebody where they don't let up nowadays still. But those guys are 40 pounds heavier and run a half second faster.
Yeah, but you watch a lot of these games. Most of these guys are letting up. Most of the time you don't see near the hits you used to see, just because of the way the rules are, and they can't do that anymore.
If you have the correct name as a starting quarterback, you are right. But I'll tell you what, I watched a lot of quarterbacks.
And Brady's one of those guys.
Yeah, and I mean they all are. Montana was one back then. They still protected those guys a little, not like they do now. But
he was protected.
He was protected more than Sage Rosenfeld would have been.
Of course,
that's what I'm saying.
They might throw the flag, but he's still taking the hit.
Yeah, but you get the flag, so what the heck?
No, and you know what? And, based on your criteria, if your criteria is okay, you're going for the absolute pressure situation. Yeah, I can understand where why you'd rank Brady number 1, because it's against the Seahawks defense is a better defense than the '88 Bengals.
And it's the same reason
I totally get that.
I don't put Manning and Favre in my top 5 all-time quarterbacks. I want to see that. That's the thing I want to see. And Aikman,
and I'm all about
Aikman
the pressure
get
situation.
My top 5, and
I
love
Joe.
Aikman. You love Joe?
Well, that's why I love watching him play. The pressure situation. That's why they call him Joe Cool. I mean, if you have to bank everything. If you have to put everything on the line, so you have to pick a quarterback to go win a game on one drive. I'd taken Joe.
I don't know. I might take John Elway. It would be between those 2 and Brady. Elway did that crap more than anybody, I think, but I'll take either one. I think Elway had to.
Yeah, all three of those guys are great.
Yeah, you give me the last 30 seconds or last minute, and you got to go 60 yards, no timeouts. I'll take any of the three. That's why I think they're the three greatest quarterbacks I ever saw, though.
Same here.
Because the ability to do that in that situation, to me, is why you are one of the greatest that ever lived.
Yeah, so I understand that. I understand that criteria. I totally get it. I was looking at more of a perfect day, but to me, it's all pretty valid. But I guess it's all the which criteria you're going to focus on that. But no, I totally get that's why I love Tom Brady. I totally, he's a fantastic quarterback. I'm not a Brady hater at all. I would have had no problem if they'd have won the Super Bowl this year. I'd have no problem calling him the greatest quarterback of all time. You can't argue it. 5 rings. And in this
6
era,
Super Bowls is still more than 4.
Yeah, I know, but he lost 2 of them.
Oh my God, you're going to blame him for losing 2 that Montana couldn't even get to?
Just saying.
Montana couldn't even get to those 2.
Just saying.
You agree, though, right?
Much shorter career too.
It's better to get 6. We always got an excuse for him, don't we? Well, Brady was tougher.
Well, it's just my preference. To me, they're basically tied.
Basically tied.
It's really hard to differentiate the 2. Played in different eras. To me, you watch either one of them, they look like the same guy out there, except Montana's more mobile.
I think Montana's more mobile because, especially his first few teams, he was the guy that was their leading rusher for a few years.
Pretty close.
I mean, Brady's mobile. I agree with you. Montana was a good running quarterback. I think Brady just refuses to run unless he absolutely has to.
Well, yeah, he looks like he's...
Yeah, Montana was... I mean, they were both... And the thing that's amazing is they're both drafted. I mean, Montana 3rd round.
Oh, yeah.
Brady in the
6th round pick. Good
yeah.
Lord.
And the Bengals picked Gilly Smith and David Klingler in the 1st round.
We picked Jim Druckenmiller in 97.
Oh, I remember him. He was from Virginia, wasn't he?
Good God, Tech? That was a terrible pick.
Virginia Tech.
Such a bad pick. I wanted the guy who ended up going to Arizona. I forget his name now.
What year was it?
97. So he's the guy that ended up beating Dallas in 98.
Jake Plummer.
Can't remember his name. Jake Plummer. That's it.
Yeah.
That's who I wanted. And so we got Drucken.
Yeah. And he actually got Denver to the AFC Championship game.
Yes, in 05.
Yeah, and Pittsburgh beat him. Yeah, he wasn't.
He's the first guy to beat Brady in the playoffs.
Yeah, well, that tells you that year Brady
was also their weakest team.
Yeah, lost 28-20 because that was a week after my second greatest tragedy, which was 2005.
Oh yeah, the Steelers game.
But the good thing is this: since then, I'm watching Carson Palmer and other playoff attempts. I'm not so sure we would beat Pittsburgh now. Of course, maybe it would have changed his career to actually be successful in a playoff game once, which they may have.
Yeah, maybe. It's hard to say. Yeah, maybe he wins that game and he's not snake bitten. Yeah,
but make sure you check out our sponsors, Gridiron Mow, www.gridironmow, Steelberg Box for all your Steeler fans, www.steelbergbox.com. Also, Dennis Petro, who owns that, gave me some crap on Facebook because I made I guess, for a Pittsburgh fan, an off-color joke about wiping my ass on a terrible towel when Leon said he was going to
I'm sure he didn't like that.
So I would like to apologize to Dennis, but we will invite him on the show to debate what other uses for terrible towels there are, if you're listening out there, Dennis. So anytime you want to come on there. If you're a Cincinnati Bengals fan, check out our sponsor, RealBengalFans.com. Check out their Facebook page. Also, check out the Steelers Life Facebook page if you're a Pittsburgh Steeler fan. Got any final words, Matt?
Well, quarterbacks are usually what make the Super Bowl great. And, we went through, if we didn't have an identical list, we were really close on who we included there. And, we probably
I think we each had maybe 2 guys that the other one left out.
Yeah, I mean, I really wanted to put Kurt Warner in. I just couldn't justify it. But, I mean, the one I would have put in was the one you put in. And, you know, it's just the quarterbacks are usually what makes the Super Bowl great. And then, you know, this Sunday, you know, I know that we wanted to hold off on maybe doing another top 10 quarterback because what if Peyton Manning has a good performance here?
Or what if he has another disastrous one?
Or what if he has another disaster that's even in the top 10?
Now, I can tell you this. My opinion is, you know, I've never been a big Peyton Manning fan. If he has a disastrous result in this game, it doesn't affect him at all in my eyes because I think he's pretty much done. If he was to win the Super Bowl, that would elevate him in my opinion. So I don't think, you know, it's like an old boxer when he's 38 fighting for the title again. If he loses, hell, that guy wouldn't have beat him 15 years ago. But if he wins, it makes you think even more of him.
Right. Yeah, I think that's just it. I think Peyton Manning has a chance to up his legacy a little bit.
Yeah, my problem is
that
this.
Second ring.
Well, I don't like the Super Bowl at all. Can't stand it. Because I don't like either quarterback.
Yeah, I'm not real, you know, I appreciate Cam Newton's abilities. I thought he's played well. I didn't appreciate his comments yesterday or whatever. I think that was a little over the top, but where he basically said because he's an African-American quarterback that people fear that. No, I don't think that's it at all. I don't think it has anything to do, people that don't like him, I don't think it has anything to do with his race. I mean, there's always going to be some racists out there.
Well, there are a lot of black quarterbacks in the NFL. So, obviously,
this is a predominantly black league.
Well, this is the thing. This is the thing, all right? Who cares? And if you want people to stop judging you by color and race, stop bringing it up all the time.
Exactly.
You know?
That's my problem with it. Why are you bringing that up?
Yeah, he's the one that brought it up. I have heard – I live in Indiana, so I'm sure with all the Klan that used to be here that there's probably a lot of racists here. I haven't heard anybody say that they hate Cam Newton or they don't like him because he's black or saying the N-word about him. And I think a lot of times it's just I don't understand. I mean, I know I'm not black, so I didn't grow up that way. But I do have a biracial daughter, so I have heard some racist comments before from people about my daughter, and it'd be directed at me, so I know a little bit about that. And I also know this. If you're a racist, I just soon you say it so I know. I don't really care. I'm not going to penalize you for it. I'm just probably not going to hang out with you, and I'm not going to turn my back on you.
Right.
But the thing is this. If you keep bringing it up yourself, I mean, it's just like I remember you brought up Doug Williams' Super Bowl 22. I remember one of the people at the media day asked him what it felt like to be a black quarterback.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. You're just a quarterback.
It keeps getting brought up. There's just no reason for it. I think the majority of the reason why the people that don't like Cam Newton, it's not even just because he celebrates. There's nothing wrong with celebrating, but I think that people, now it's become such a show. It started with the Superman, then now it's the dabbing, then it's, you know, giving the ball to kids, which I think everybody likes that. But it's after every first down. Luke Kuechly takes a touchdown, and he's out there doing the same. It's such a show now.
Well, see, I don't care what you do if you score a touchdown, but a freaking 3rd and 4 and you run for a first down and get it by a yard, what the hell do you have to draw attention to yourself for? That is what I don't like about it. I mean, that's...
Yeah, I think that's why people don't like him. I mean, I don't think most people don't care. A lot of people celebrate when they score. And I don't have a problem with that. It gets to be a little excessive. Yeah, but I don't like it after every first down.
I don't know. You remember Kelly Washington, the wide receiver from the Bengals?
Yes.
Okay. He used to do the squirrel every time he'd get a first down, which in 6 years I think was 9 times. But, I mean, come on. Grow up. Just chill out. You know, there's white guys that get on my nerves with that, too. I mean, I don't care what color you are. I don't care if you celebrate. Just celebrate when you score a touchdown. I don't care what you do. You know, I didn't have a problem with T.O. doing a little thing down in Dallas on the Star.
Me either.
You know, if you don't want him to do that, don't let him score. I know you didn't. You're a Niner fan. You're an asshole. But you know what I mean.
You'd have loved that, too, if that was your team. Oh, man. If that was in
if it was my team, we probably
They're
would have
choking.
flipped some cars over in the parking lot and drug them out and put them on the cars.
Right.
Especially, back then.
Right.
Because all our
Well,
guys,
yeah,
black and white, got arrested back then.
Yeah,
at least now we just do our fighting on the field instead of in bars.
Right. Exactly. And you should. Better to do it there than in the bar. But yeah, I think that's the problem. I think that is why people don't like Cam Newton. It has nothing to do with race. And I just thought it was just really low class of him to bring that up. And to say that people fear him because they've never seen anyone like him to compare him to anybody. Come on. Randall Cunningham completely changed the face of the game when he came in with his running ability and his ability to pass.
And I don't remember too many people that didn't like Randall Cunningham.
Yeah. People watch Warren Moon. He guy put up ridiculous numbers. Donovan McNabb, Michael Vick, there's a lot of players like this. Steve McNair was real good for a while.
I think it just means how big and fast and strong he is.
Yeah, and I get it. He's a big dude, but it's to me, his comments were just ridiculous.
Well, hey, you know what? Anything to get attention to the game, and you know how it is. In the corporate world and the media anymore, they love to play up the race card because they think it can put butts in seats and make more money for them. So I don't know how the NFL could put more butts in seats or make more money, but and the thing is, he's allowed to say it. He's allowed to say it now because if a white player would have said something like that black people fear.
Oh my God.
Oh, hell would have broken.
Way.
Can you imagine Larry Bird saying something like that?
Yeah, right.
But
That'd
you know what?
Ridiculous.
Isaiah Thomas and Dennis Rodman said something about Bird being white. He'd just be another guy.
Yep, I remember that.
About that. They
had to have a press
a little
conference
bit on
together.
TV, but nobody got fined. Yeah, then they had a bullcrap press conference where they acted like they apologized. That's probably what they meant. Who cares anymore? This world is all worried about whose feelings hurt. Most people have moved on from this issue. Yeah, but it keeps being brought up. Exactly. But, all right, well, we're going to get off here, so make sure you check us out, the Grueling Truth Facebook page. Check us out on Spreaker and Stitcher. You can check out our Pick'em show, which was basically a conference review show with former Pro Bowl offensive lineman Leon Searcy and former protector of John Elway during Super Bowl 21, Mark Cooper, myself and Matt, of course. Also, check out the Bengals Trivia show we've got. We've got another semifinal, which will be coming up Saturday night. And you can check out an abbreviated interview of Orlando Canizales, where our studio went to crap. So we're just waiting on Matt to get that up. There's like a minute that's messed up there, and I think the interview will only be in 10 or 11 minutes, but he's still an International Boxing Hall of Famer, so we got to throw it up there. So
Absolutely.
Make sure you check us out next week. We will have the Super Bowl special Pick'em show. We will have the finals of the Bengals Trivia show. We'll have another boxing show with me and Dave. I think me and Matt are going to be back with the top 10 Super Bowl teams of all time, maybe a couple other top 10s during the week leading up to the Super Bowl. So for Matt Andrew Scavage, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.